I've always thought that after a decade of marriage, you'd know someone inside and out. Lauren and I had built a life together, layer by layer, each piece feeling as though it had been set in stone. But over the past few months, I began to notice small fractures in that seemingly solid foundation. They were subtle at first, quiet shifts in her demeanor, moments where she seemed lost in her thoughts, glancing down at her phone a bit too often with a faint, almost secretive smile. It felt like standing in a familiar room where someone had moved all the furniture by a few inches. Nothing dramatic, yet it threw me off balance. The first real sign was the change in our conversations. Our talks, once filled with warmth and humor, now seemed to revolve only around the essentials: groceries, bills, the kids' schedules. Anything beyond that was met with short answers, sometimes even with irritation. It was as if an invisible wall had been raised between us, one I could feel but couldn't understand. I tried to brush it off at first, convincing myself that every marriage had lulls, and that we'd get back to normal soon. Yet there was one topic that consistently broke through her aloofness: her work at the gallery. She was working closely with a sculptor named Michael, an artist older than her but widely admired. She spoke of him with a level of excitement that I hadn't seen in years. Her voice would light up when she mentioned their collaborations, their late nights at the gallery preparing for upcoming exhibits, and his incredible vision that she seemed to value above all else. While I was happy that she found something meaningful at work, something about the way she talked about him didn't sit right with me. I'd never seen her look that way when she talked about our life, our family, or me. One evening, I came home from work later than usual, exhausted but hoping to reconnect. I found her at the kitchen table, her face illuminated by her laptop's glow, entirely absorbed. She barely looked up when I entered, only offering a distracted hi. We exchanged a few words about the day, but I could sense her mind was elsewhere. After a while, she left the room, and as I went to set my briefcase down, I noticed her laptop was still open on the table. I know it wasn't right to look, but something inside me, a quiet but persistent voice, urged me to check. I glanced at the screen and saw a notification from Michael. The message preview read, "Last night was incredible. Thanks for the inspiration." The words hung in the air, taunting me, twisting something inside. My initial reaction was disbelief. It felt like a punch to the gut, like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. I knew I should confront her right then, demand an explanation, but I was paralyzed. I couldn't bear the idea of an argument, of an ugly truth spilling out. Instead, I took a breath, forced myself to calm down, and shut her laptop. If she noticed I'd seen it, she didn't show. From that moment, everything changed. I found myself constantly analyzing her actions, her words, even the smallest gestures. She started staying out later, sometimes coming home hours after her usual time, citing last-minute work at the gallery or Michael needing help with an installation. I'd see her putting on makeup before heading to the gallery in ways she hadn't bothered with for years, carefully choosing her outfits and slipping out with an enthusiasm that seemed painfully absent at home. As weeks went by, I tried to rationalize it, telling myself I was being paranoid. But the signs continued to pile up, too many to ignore. A forgotten receipt from an expensive restaurant, her sudden attention to her appearance, the way she guarded her phone. None of it fit with the Lauren I knew, or at least thought I knew. One night, while lying in bed beside her, I replayed that message from Michael in my mind. The words, incredible and inspiration, felt like needles under my skin. They carried a weight, a meaning that felt too intimate, too personal. I had to know the truth, even if it shattered everything we'd built together. Instead of confronting her, I decided to find answers on my own terms. I needed to see for myself, to understand what had gone wrong. I'd go to the gallery, observe, and look for whatever clue I could find. I told myself that I wasn't ready to confront her because I didn't have enough proof, but the truth was, I wasn't ready to face the reality of betrayal. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a quiet vow. I would uncover the truth, whatever it was, and then decide what to do. The next day, Lauren left early, saying she'd be at the gallery all afternoon for an important project with Michael. I waited a few hours, then drove to the gallery myself, parking my car around the corner and making my way inside as inconspicuously as possible. I wandered through the exhibits, feigning interest in the artwork, but my eyes were focused solely on her. I saw her and Michael together, discussing a sculpture in low voices, standing just a little too close, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that seemed intimate, conspiratorial. Watching them interact was like watching a movie I couldn't look away from, but every detail felt like a knife twist. They shared subtle glances, exchanged low laughs, and once, when they thought no one was looking, I saw him reach out and touch her arm gently. She didn't pull away. In fact, she looked up at him with a warmth I hadn't seen in her eyes for a long time. I left the gallery that day feeling like I'd finally seen the truth, and it stung. But I still had no solid proof, no undeniable evidence. All I had were whispers and half-hidden gestures, enough to deepen my suspicions, but not enough to justify a confrontation. I decided that the only way to truly know was to keep watching, to be patient, even if it tore me apart inside. This was just the beginning. I didn't know where this would lead, but I knew I couldn't turn back now. My heart was cracking, and the cracks were only getting deeper. I braced myself for whatever would come next, for whatever hidden truths might be lurking just beneath the surface. The decision to watch her, rather than confront her, felt both cowardly and necessary. If I was wrong, confronting her would only drive a deeper wedge between us. But if I was right, well, I didn't want to face that outcome without something concrete. And so, I became an observer in my own life, watching her movements with an intensity that surprised me. The next time Lauren mentioned a late night at the gallery with Michael, I didn't argue or even ask many questions. Instead, I wished her good luck, adding a casual, "Let me know when you're on your way home." But the second she left, I was out the door. I parked across the street from the gallery, staying in the shadows where no one would notice me. The gallery's lights were dimmed except for the exhibit area where I could see Lauren and Michael standing close to one of his sculptures, talking and laughing. It was like watching strangers, two people lost in a world where I didn't belong. They moved with an ease that made my stomach turn small touches, glances that held meaning, the kind of intimacy that felt like an invasion of everything we had once shared. Michael leaned in, gesturing toward the sculpture, and Lauren's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. She seemed animated, alive, as though she were rediscovering something she'd lost. I wanted to believe it was just the thrill of working with someone creative, that she was only inspired by his work. But in my gut, I knew that look wasn't just admiration. It was something deeper, something I couldn't unsee. For the next few nights, I kept my distance, trying not to jump to conclusions, even though every instinct screamed that something was wrong. I noticed her phone now had a new password, something she'd never bothered with before. She was coming home late more often, saying she'd had project meetings or that Michael needed her help finalizing details for an exhibit. Each time she left, I felt the pull to follow her, to catch them in some undeniable moment, but I restrained myself. I knew that if I pushed too hard, she'd notice, and I didn't want her to know that I was watching. A week later, I decided to attend one of the gallery's open exhibitions, telling Lauren I wanted to support her work. She seemed surprised but pleased, giving me a smile that felt almost genuine. She didn't know I had an ulterior motive. I needed to see her with him in a setting where I could blend in without raising suspicion. I dressed carefully, trying to look casual while every nerve in my body buzzed with tension. When I arrived, the gallery was crowded with patrons, mingling and admiring Michael's work. I scanned the room until I spotted them in a corner, talking animatedly. I approached slowly, careful not to catch their attention too soon. As I watched, Michael leaned close to Lauren, whispering something that made her laugh and touch his arm. That single gesture, her hand resting on his arm, for just a second too long, made my stomach twist. I positioned myself nearby, pretending to study a sculpture, but really straining to hear their conversation. Most of it was about the exhibit, the art pieces, technical details. But every now and then, there were softer words, private exchanges that made my fists clench. I watched as Michael's hand briefly brushed the small of her back, his fingers lingering just long enough to make my pulse race. The familiarity between them was undeniable, and I felt like I was on the outside looking in, like a stranger in my own marriage. Then, something unexpected happened. Lauren excused herself to greet a group of guests, leaving Michael standing alone. He didn't notice me as I moved closer, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "Impressive work," I commented casually, pretending to be an interested patron. Michael turned to me, clearly pleased with the compliment, and launched into an enthusiastic explanation of his creative process. I listened, studying him, trying to understand what it was about him that had drawn my wife in. He was charismatic, no doubt, confident in a way that made him the center of attention without even trying. He had an air of mystery, a certain allure that felt almost magnetic. I could see why Lauren might be drawn to him, and that realization twisted the knife even deeper. Just as I was about to walk away, Michael caught sight of Lauren across the room and gave a slight nod, a subtle signal I might have missed if I weren't watching closely. Lauren glanced over and smiled a smile that was warm, soft, the kind she used to reserve just for me. In that moment, something inside me hardened. Whatever was happening between them, it wasn't just professional admiration or creative inspiration. There was something more, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake replaying every interaction I'd witnessed, every look, every gesture. I needed to know more, needed proof of what was happening beyond the gallery walls. If there was even the smallest chance that I was wrong, I wanted to be sure. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. The cracks in our marriage had become fault lines, and I was watching it all crumble. The next morning, Lauren acted as though nothing had changed. She sipped her coffee, talking about an upcoming exhibit, her face bright with enthusiasm. She seemed like the woman I'd fallen in love with, and for a second, I wondered if I was overreacting. But then I remembered the way she looked at him, the way she seemed to come alive in his presence, and my resolve hardened. Instead of confronting her, I decided to play along. I nodded, asking her questions, feigning interest as if I didn't suspect a thing. But inside, a plan was forming. If I was to confront her, I needed solid evidence. I couldn't just rely on intuition or subtle gestures. I needed undeniable proof of her betrayal, something that would reveal the truth and give me the clarity I needed. And so, I became a shadow in my own life, watching, waiting, and preparing for the moment when everything would be brought to light. I could feel the storm brewing, and all I could do now was wait for the right moment to strike. The more I watched Lauren, the deeper my doubts sank. Every interaction between her and Michael replayed in my mind, haunting me. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that maybe I was seeing what I feared, not what was real. But every time I'd start to let go, something would pull me right back into suspicion. Then, I met Haley. Haley was Lauren's assistant at the gallery, a bright, attentive young woman who had been part of our lives in small ways for a while, mostly at gallery events. I'd always seen her as Lauren's protege, a trusted colleague, but now, she became something else. Haley started noticing the tension between Lauren and me, and the way I seemed distant and preoccupied. She caught me staring across the gallery one evening, lost in thought, and pulled me aside. "Are you okay, Alex?" she asked gently. Her eyes were filled with genuine concern, and for some reason, I felt myself unburdening a little. I hinted at my suspicions, carefully avoiding any direct accusations, but making it clear that things weren't right between Lauren and me. Haley listened without judgment, nodding thoughtfully, offering me the comfort of someone who simply understood. Over the next few weeks, we began to talk more. What started as casual check-ins after gallery events soon turned into longer conversations over coffee or drinks, quiet moments where I found myself confiding in her more than I had in anyone. She became a solace, a place of calm in the storm of my own thoughts. One evening, after another painfully strained dinner with Lauren, I texted Haley on impulse, asking if she wanted to meet for coffee. She responded right away, and within the hour, we were sitting across from each other at a small cafe, sharing quiet words in the dim light. As we spoke, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, a connection, a warmth that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. That night, as we said goodbye, there was a moment of silence. Haley looked up at me with a softness that felt dangerous, and before I knew it, we'd shared a kiss. It was a brief, almost hesitant moment, but it shook me. In that instant, I realized just how deeply the cracks in my marriage had spread. Here I was, seeking comfort from someone other than my wife, allowing myself to feel something I hadn't felt in years. A part of me hated myself for it, but another part, a larger part, felt justified. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn to Haley more and more. She was there for me in a way that Lauren hadn't been in years, offering support and understanding without any judgment. And while I knew that my relationship with Haley wasn't the answer to the pain I was feeling, I couldn't help but find solace in her presence. At the same time, my resolve to uncover the truth about Lauren grew stronger. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, torn between suspicion and doubt. If there was something real between her and Michael, I needed to know. I needed to face it, confront it, and decide where to go from here. So, I took another step. I started looking for ways to gather concrete proof, messages, emails, anything that would confirm my suspicions. I knew Lauren's phone was now off limits, guarded by a password I didn't know, but I had access to her laptop. One evening, while she was in the shower, I quickly opened it, scrolling through her messages. Most were harmless exchanges about work, but then I found a conversation with Michael that made my heart stop. Their messages were cryptic but unmistakably intimate, filled with late-night confessions and subtle, flirtatious undertones. Reading those words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. There it was, in black and white, the evidence I had dreaded but needed. My doubts were no longer just doubts. They were confirmed, undeniable. The Lauren I thought I knew had drifted away, and in her place was someone who shared her innermost thoughts with another man. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling as the reality settled in. She hadn't just drifted from me. She made a choice to build something with someone else. And suddenly, my own actions with Haley didn't seem as reckless. I had felt guilty, but now that guilt faded, replaced by something darker, a sense of betrayal that went beyond anything I had prepared myself for. I had my proof. I knew the truth. And now, I had to decide what to do with it. After reading those messages, I knew there was no turning back. My suspicions weren't just whispers in my mind anymore. They were real, tangible, and deeply painful. But I wasn't ready to confront Lauren outright. Instead, I decided to play my own game, a shadowy dance of patience and deception. I wanted to see just how deep her connection with Michael went. And perhaps on some level, I wanted her to see that I was slipping away, too. Haley was, as always, a welcome distraction, and she had her own suspicions about Lauren and Michael. She didn't say it outright, but there was a silent understanding between us. We'd both been wounded, both played by the same hand. And so, we became allies of sorts, each of us seeking comfort in the other. As we spent more time together, our bond grew stronger, our conversations longer and more intimate. Haley was everything Lauren hadn't been in a long time: warm, attentive, and genuinely invested in me. One evening, after another strained dinner with Lauren, I called Haley and suggested we go out. We ended up at a quiet restaurant on the edge of town, one where Lauren and I had never been. There, under the dim glow of candlelight, we shared stories and laughs. It felt freeing, almost as if I were stepping out of a cage I hadn't realized I'd been locked in. As the night went on, I allowed myself to let go, to lean into the companionship Haley offered without guilt. By the time we left, I knew this was something deeper than just revenge. I was finding something real. Meanwhile, I continued observing Lauren, noticing every little change in her routine. She was coming home later than usual, often claiming she'd lost track of time or that Michael had needed her input on a new piece. Her excuses felt thin, hollow, and as I listened, I realized she didn't even try to make them convincing. She must have thought I was oblivious, or maybe she didn't care if I knew. My opportunity came at an upcoming gallery opening. It was a private event, an exclusive showcase for Michael's latest collection, and I knew Lauren would be there with him. I decided that Haley and I would attend as well, this time as a couple. I didn't want to just watch from the shadows anymore. I wanted Lauren to see that she wasn't the only one capable of moving on. When we arrived, Haley and I walked in together, arm in arm, acting every bit the close pair we had become. I saw Lauren's eyes widen the moment she spotted us. Her expression was a mixture of shock and something else. Was it jealousy? I wasn't sure, but whatever it was, it felt like a small, twisted victory. I wanted her to feel the sting, to wonder if she'd lost me the way I felt I had lost her. Throughout the evening, Haley and I kept close, exchanging warm glances, sharing quiet laughs, and leaning into each other's presence. Every now and then, I'd catch Lauren glancing our way, her gaze flickering between me and Haley, and then shifting toward Michael as if seeking reassurance. I almost felt a twinge of satisfaction, watching her squirm for once, unsure of her place. At one point, Lauren made her way over, her expression carefully neutral, though I could see the tension in her jaw. She barely looked at Haley, directing her attention entirely to me. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight," she said, her tone edged with a forced lightness. "Why wouldn't I be here?" I replied, keeping my tone just as cool. "I've always supported your work, and I thought it'd be nice to have someone here to enjoy it with." Her eyes flicked toward Haley, and for a moment, a flash of something like anger crossed her face. But she quickly masked it, offering a thin smile instead. "Well, it's good to see you both," she said, before turning back to Michael, who had been watching us from across the room. The two exchanged a look, one that spoke volumes, and walked away together, leaving me and Haley alone. I watched as they disappeared into a quieter part of the gallery, my heart pounding with a mix of hurt and anger. Seeing her so effortlessly switch her focus back to him stung in a way I hadn't anticipated, and I knew that my charade with Haley, satisfying as it was in the moment, couldn't erase the betrayal I felt. Haley squeezed my hand gently. "Are you okay?" I nodded, though the truth was, I wasn't sure. The game we were playing, this dance of deception and half-truths, was starting to wear on me. But I wasn't ready to end it just yet. Not until I'd seen this through. Not until I truly understood what Lauren had chosen over our life together. As the evening drew to a close, I knew I was on the edge of a decision. Confrontation loomed, but I needed one final piece to close the chapter. I needed her to admit what she'd done, to say it out loud, and then maybe, just maybe, I could finally let go. The game of shadows was nearly over. Soon, there would be nowhere left to hide. The gallery event marked a turning point, a line I couldn't uncross. Seeing Lauren with Michael that night, seeing the way she looked at him even after catching sight of me with Haley, made it all clear. She had made her choice long before I had even known there was one to be made. The life we had built together was already crumbling, piece by piece, and I was ready to pull off the last mask. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, Lauren seemed unusually quiet, drifting through the house with an almost ghostly air. As she poured herself coffee, I felt a spark of resentment bubble up in me, and I decided I couldn't play this game any longer. I was tired of pretending. I wanted to hear her side, to finally know the truth of what had driven us to this point. "Lauren," I said, my voice steady but firm, "we need to talk." She looked at me, surprised, but then her gaze hardened, almost as if she had been expecting this. She set down her cup and crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "About what?" "You know exactly what," I replied, unable to keep the edge from my tone. "About you and Michael." There it was out in the open, the words hanging between us like a chasm. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it, but then something shifted in her eyes, a strange blend of defiance and relief. "Fine. Yes, I've grown close to Michael," she admitted, her voice low and steady. "More than close, actually. He understands me in ways that I didn't realize I was missing." Her words hit hard, but I forced myself to stay composed. "And all this time, you just, what, hoped I wouldn't notice? Hoped that I'd keep looking the other way while you found yourself with someone else?" She sighed, rubbing her forehead. "Alex, it's not like that. You don't understand. Working with him brought out parts of me I thought I'd lost. I'm more than just your wife, more than just the life we've built. I needed something for myself." I shook my head, feeling a bitter laugh escape me. "Something for yourself? Lauren, we had a life, a whole life that we built together. And you threw it away for what? Some thrill? Some idea of being inspired again?" Her face softened, almost pitying. "I didn't throw anything away, Alex. I tried to tell you in so many ways that I felt stifled, that I needed more. And then Michael came along, and for the first time in years, I felt alive. I didn't plan for this to happen, it just did. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my voice even. So, where does that leave us? Or is there even an us left? She hesitated, her expression turning solemn. I don't know, Alex. I didn't expect it to go this far, but Michael and I, we're making plans. Real plans. She looked down, almost as if she were ashamed. I've decided to move out. I was going to tell you soon. I wanted to make it as gentle as possible. The finality of her words hit like a blow. I hadn't expected her to lay it out so bluntly. So, that's it, then? You're leaving? My voice shook, though I tried to keep it steady. She nodded, avoiding my gaze. I think it's best for both of us. We've been drifting apart for so long, and maybe it's time we accept that. I stared at her, trying to process everything. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it was all there, swirling together in a storm I could barely contain. But underneath it, a strange sense of clarity began to form. This was the end, and nothing I could say would change it. Just then, Haley crossed my mind, and I realized that Lauren wasn't the only one who had drifted. While she had found her escape with Michael, I had found a glimpse of something else with Haley. In some twisted way, we were both guilty of abandoning what we'd once shared. You know what, Lauren? I said, my voice soft but resolute. Maybe you're right. Maybe this is the best thing. I deserve someone who actually wants to be in this marriage, and it's clear that person isn't you. A flicker of something crossed her face, but she quickly masked it. I'm sorry, Alex. I never wanted to hurt you. Then you shouldn't have lied, I replied, standing up. But I guess it doesn't matter now. The room fell silent, the weight of everything settling around us. We had both unmasked our secrets, our betrayals, and the truth lay bare between us, raw and unfiltered. There was no going back, no way to repair the damage. All that was left was to accept it and move forward. Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving her standing alone. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange sense of relief, a finality that brought both pain and peace. For the first time, I was ready to let go of the life I'd once fought so hard to protect. It was time to move on, to step into the unknown and build something new, something free from lies and betrayal. The masks were off, and we were both free. The days following our confrontation felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. I'd been prepared for anger, for pain, but I hadn't expected the emptiness that came with letting go. The realization that the life I'd known with Lauren was truly over settled heavily around me. For so long, I'd defined myself by our relationship, by the routines and roles that came with it. Now, with all of that stripped away, I was left standing in the remnants of something that had once seemed unbreakable. Lauren moved out a week later, taking only what she needed and leaving the rest. There was no grand goodbye, no heartfelt apologies. She was methodical, detached. Watching her pack felt as if I was observing a stranger, someone who'd been in my life but was never really there. Every box she carried out was a reminder of the life we'd built, now disassembled and scattered. I tried to muster the words to say something meaningful, but the silence between us felt louder than anything I could have said. In her absence, the house became a hollow shell. Every room seemed to echo with memories, a mix of laughter and arguments, warmth and distance. Walking through it felt like wandering through the ghost of my old life, each corner reminding me of what had been and what I'd lost. Even the simplest tasks, making coffee, setting the table, felt foreign now. They were things we'd once done together, habits that had tethered us, and now they felt like relics of a past I could barely recognize. Haley reached out to me a few days after Lauren left. She'd heard through gallery gossip that Lauren and I had separated, and her message was brief, offering support if I needed it. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to face anyone else, even someone who had been there for me in my darkest moments. But there was something about Haley's words, a genuine kindness, a reminder that not everyone in my life was defined by betrayal, that gave me a small sense of comfort. I invited her to meet at a quiet cafe, somewhere far from the weight of everything I'd just been through. Seeing her felt like a breath of fresh air, a reminder that life could exist beyond the walls of grief and anger I'd built around myself. She listened without judgment as I told her about the end of my marriage, the emptiness I was left with, and the confusion that had followed. Her presence was warm and understanding, a stark contrast to the coldness I'd felt with Lauren in those final days. But even with Haley, there was a hesitation I couldn't shake. The scars of betrayal ran deep, and trusting someone again, even someone as supportive as Haley, felt daunting. The past weeks had shown me how fragile love could be, how easily trust could be shattered. I wanted to let myself feel close to her, but part of me was afraid of letting go, of opening myself up to the possibility of pain once more. As the days passed, I began to rebuild in small ways. I returned to the things I had set aside, rediscovering hobbies I'd forgotten and spending time with friends I'd drifted from over the years. Slowly, I felt myself coming back, piece by piece, finding a new rhythm in a life I hadn't chosen but could still shape. The house that once felt empty began to feel like my own, a blank slate rather than a hollow echo. And though Haley remained in my life, offering moments of companionship and warmth, I knew I needed time. I had to find myself again before I could fully open up to anyone. For now, she was a reminder that life could continue, that new connections were possible, even if they needed time to grow. The illusions I had once held of a marriage that would last forever, of a love that could withstand anything, were gone. But in their place was something different, a hard-won understanding that life goes on, that even shattered pieces can be reshaped into something new. In the end, I had survived the storm. And while I didn't know what the future held, I was ready to face it on my own terms, free from the shadows of betrayal that had once defined me. Months passed, and the weight of my broken marriage slowly lifted, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I no longer woke up wondering where Lauren was or what she was doing. I had learned to live with the silence of the house, to appreciate it even. In many ways, I was rediscovering myself, finding the parts of me that had been buried under years of compromise and routine. Haley and I stayed in touch, meeting occasionally for coffee or a quiet evening walk. She was patient, never pressing, always allowing me to find my own pace. I valued her friendship, her unwavering presence, but I knew I needed time to be on my own. For the first time in a long time, I wanted to focus on myself, not as someone's husband or part of a couple, but as an individual, a man healing from the wounds of betrayal. I threw myself into projects I'd neglected, from small repairs around the house to hobbies I hadn't had time for. I'd forgotten how satisfying it was to work with my hands, to lose myself in something creative and tangible. I even joined a weekend hiking group, reconnecting with nature in a way that felt grounding, like each step I took on those trails was helping me move forward in life. One evening, as I was sorting through old photos, I stumbled upon one from our early years, Lauren and me at a beach, our faces lit up with the excitement of a new life together. For a moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia, but it was no longer the sharp ache it had once been. Instead, it was a gentle reminder of a chapter that had closed, a part of my past that I had made peace with. That night, I felt a surge of gratitude, not for the pain, but for the strength I'd found through it. I was grateful to have the chance to start anew, to build a life that reflected who I truly was, rather than one built on old expectations and unspoken resentments. The past had left its scars, but it had also left me wiser, more aware of my own needs, and more willing to face life with open eyes. Haley and I met again for coffee on a brisk autumn afternoon. As we talked, I felt a warmth growing between us, something that went beyond friendship yet felt grounded and real. She asked me how I was doing, and for the first time, I could answer honestly, "I'm good. I think I'm finally ready for whatever's next." She smiled, a soft, understanding look that held no pressure, only encouragement. "I'm glad to hear that, Alex. You deserve it." It was then that I realized I was ready to explore something new, not as a means to escape pain, but because I was finally open to happiness again. Haley and I agreed to take things slow, allowing ourselves time to grow and see where things might lead. There was no rush, no urgency. After everything I'd been through, I knew the value of patience and the importance of healing fully before jumping into something new. As I drove home that evening, I felt a quiet joy that had been absent for far too long. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Life, I realized, had offered me a second chance, a chance to redefine myself, to let go of past wounds, and to embrace the future on my own terms. Back at home, I walked through each room, no longer feeling the emptiness I once had. Instead, I saw it as a canvas, a place where I could create new memories and new routines, ones that were entirely my own. I no longer felt bound by the weight of betrayal or loss. I was free, and with that freedom came a quiet strength, a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. I didn't know where the road with Haley would lead, but I was finally at peace with letting it unfold naturally. Whether it blossomed into something lasting or remained a friendship, I was grateful for her presence in my life. I was ready to move forward, to embrace whatever life had in store for me. With each passing day, I felt more like myself, like a man who had weathered a storm and come out the other side stronger and wiser. My heart was no longer bound by the weight of betrayal. It was open, ready for a new chapter, a new beginning. And as I stood there, looking out at the world ahead, I knew that this time, I would live life fully, freely, and with a newfound sense of purpose.